Seconds and counting. 25 seconds and counting. We are still go. 20 seconds. Guidance alert. The guidance system now going internal. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, and to my viewers in Europe and Africa, good afternoon and good morning to my viewers in the Western Hemisphere, and welcome to the Angry Astronaut. Thank you very much for tuning in, and got an interesting topic of conversation this evening. Of course, we're talking about Starship, as we often do, but this time we are also going to be talking a little bit about what NASA seems to be doing with Starship and what NASA's apparent plans appear to be, because there seems to be some changes in that regard. New Zealand, thank you so much for the $5. Really do appreciate that. Rodney, thank you so much. Where's everybody checking in from, by the way? We got people who are already checking in. Hello, Birmingham, and hello to Houston, Texas. Thank you very much for checking in. And we got Ohio as well. And where's everybody else checking in from? Don't be shy. Feel free to let me know where you might be watching from tonight. Hello, Spencer, Massachusetts. Guten Abend, Milheim on Ruhr. And we have Nottinghamshire. Hello. And Ballyclare in Four Marks, UK. And Derby. Hello, Derby. I'm actually just north of Derby right now. Hello, Melbourne, Florida, and Glasgow and Stockholm, Sweden. Thank you so much for tuning in Italy. Hello, deep in the catacombs, one of the places I work, BC, British Columbia, Canada. We have New Jersey, and we have Prague. Czechia. We also have Anglesey, North Wales. We have Stratford and another Wales, and we have Arizona, Roswell, New Mexico. We have New York and Vancouver, Canada, Bennington, Vermont, West Palm Beach, Paris, Tennessee, Hinckley, UK, and Northumberland, Washington, D.C. Chris in Lincolnshire, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for the tenor. Chris, I was just in Lincolnshire just a couple hours ago, actually. Such irony. Maybe we can connect tomorrow. Hello, Twickenham, England, and hello, Scotland, and Donetsk, and also Kent, UK, Baghdad, well, Arizona, Shackleton, hello, Shackleton Crater, and Germany, Finland, Southwest Scotland, Romania, Skipto, thank you so much for the $2. Vale and Edinburgh. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. So here's the situation with Starship as we understand it right now. Just to be clear, Starship may be ready from a technical standpoint at the moment, but it isn't ready in terms of the FAA. And the reason for that is I just got an update from my friend at the FAA, a really great guy over there, by the way. He handles a lot of their PR stuff. And as of right now, SpaceX still has not submitted their final mishap report. to the FAA. Skipto, thank you again so much for your support. I can't read. Okay. I should know what that means. I apologize. So in any event, that is an important hurdle that Starship has yet to circumvent is the mishap report that has to be submitted to the FAA. So, and if a mishap report has not been submitted, that means that SpaceX does not yet have a complete understanding of what went wrong and a plan of action to correct it. SpaceX will not submit a mishap report until they have both of those things. And by the way, just want to notify producer, I can't actually hear you. Got a bit of a problem on the audio side. So if there are any issues, feel free to text me in case there's anything I urgently need to know. And Chris, I do apologize that you didn't know that I was in Lincolnshire. There was a viewer who really wanted to meet me, and I just happened to be up in this area anyway, and I'd never been to Lincoln Cathedral, so we went out and spent some time this afternoon talking. So in any event, this is the sort of thing I can definitely do again, though, and I would really like to, if you're not available tomorrow or whatever, or anybody in this region, I'm happy to communicate with you. Best way to do that is through email. If you want to email me, you can start off there. Maybe I can, work. We can talk through WhatsApp, etc. But we'll get to that in terms of future meetup opportunities. That's kind of a different topic. But in any event, I am up here just north of Derby tonight in a hotel. Came up here with the idea of, for one thing, finally taking a vacation, and secondly, to visit some folks. So, all of that having been said, even though SpaceX isn't at a state right now to where they are ready to launch, that is to say, the FAA has not received the mishap report, and so a launch is not imminent, although it probably will happen by the end of May or early June at the latest. Things are happening with Starship that are pretty interesting because the Artemis program has never really been about any more than 4 astronauts being on the lunar surface at any one time. Okay. So the habitats required for 4 astronauts is really minimal, really minimal. And the supply requirements, the resupply equipment, food, life support, etc., to sustain 4 astronauts on the surface of the moon for a month or a couple of months or whatever, fairly minimal. But at the same time, as some of you may have seen the latest images, and that's on my thumbnail of this particular video of the Starship cargo, the cargo versions of Starship that NASA has contracted SpaceX to put together for lunar missions. And these things can carry colossal amounts of cargo. John Morgan, thank you so much for the tenor. I really do appreciate it. Michael Maxey, thank you so much for the $5. NASA reserved their tracking plane May 20th to the 29th. Yeah. And I would say we're probably going to be closer to the 29th by the time we're actually ready to go. Once again, and, if SpaceX doesn't submit that mishap report, that, puts things kind of behind the 8 ball. You need to at least get that mishap report into the FAA. The FAA then compiles their list of corrective actions, although generally that list has already been made up by the time the report is submitted, etc. But still, all of that, at least in the past, has taken a minimum of a month or so from the time that the mishap report is submitted to liftoff, at least a month. So hopefully SpaceX submits that mishap report, say on Monday or something like that. Then we can probably, I can see a launch by the end of May under those circumstances. Anyway, getting back to what they've been talking about. What NASA is asking from both SpaceX and Blue Origin is substantially more ambitious than what Artemis requires. Let me say that again. What NASA is requesting from both SpaceX and Blue Origin is far more than what Artemis requires, far more than what a mere 4 astronauts really need on the surface of the moon in terms of habitat space, in terms of supplies, in terms of rovers. There are depictions of Starship deploying as many as 3 rovers at the same time in some of these illustrations. And the amount of cargo that's being described being deployed by these cargo Starship versions, and also Blue Moon for that matter, is in the vicinity of 10 to 20 metric tons. When the ISS gets resupplied, it's nowhere near that much. Not even close. You're talking maybe 3 or 4 metric tons, 5 at the outside. So, I mean, that's what the ISS and their astronauts require for 6 months or longer. A very long period of operations on the International Space Station. And that can be done with a relatively small resupply ship. Why then does NASA require a colossal vessel like Starship or Blue Moon for that matter that's capable of deploying all of this payload onto the lunar surface? In my opinion, and I just don't think there's any other logical answer to this. I don't think NASA's engaging in just ignorant overkill here. I think that they have very ambitious plans for the future of lunar exploration and lunar colonization. Boy, John, thank you so much for throwing out the 5 Angry Astronaut memberships. Really appreciate that. You get a membership, and we'll make sure that all of you get an invitation to our Discord server tonight. And that comes with exclusive content, early release content. Most importantly, though, access to folks who oftentimes work in the spaceflight industry. So very exciting stuff, and really look forward to meeting all of you. By the way, I'm running on a limited laptop battery. I still don't have a replacement power block for my laptop. So if all of a sudden I get cut off tonight, I apologize. So we'll keep going here with this discussion. So that being the case, then I really feel that NASA has some very aggressive ambitions as far as Artemis is concerned, far beyond the described objectives of Artemis. And the reason that they're doing this is because they understand what Starship can do. They understand Starship's massive payload capabilities, and even Blue Moon has pretty substantial payload capabilities if and when it eventually gets into service. And so, with those capabilities, why waste it? Why not go big? And there could be some very good reasons for going big. By the way, thanks so much, Crunch, for the $5. Really appreciate that. Any chance to leave IFT 5 in orbit to test docking, transfer with IFT 6? Maybe. Yeah, that's possible, but it isn't to keep in mind, I would say that there's probably going to be some more launches of Starship before we have that first Starship to Starship demonstration of refueling in low Earth orbit. I really think that that is likely to happen, that we're going to have several more launches, because NASA is their current plan is to do a ship to ship propellant transfer demonstration in 2025. And the idea behind that is to send up a Starship, and then approximately a month later, send up a chaser Starship on the same orbital trajectory, have the chaser Starship run down the first Starship that was sent up, dock The two dock together and then do a propellant transfer between them. And that demonstration is not expected to happen until 2025. And it's a very, very big difference between a propellant transfer demonstration, a one-time thing, and transferring propellant 10 times or so, which is what's going to be required in order to get Starship to the moon. Orion has not been tested with docking ability. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. We definitely, there's a lot that still needs to be done. And by the way, I think Artemis 3 would be a really good opportunity to do some testing in that regard to dock Orion with the lunar gateway. I really am not a fan of this idea of doing a test of Orion to Starship docking in low Earth orbit, which is essentially a duplication of the Apollo 9 mission, if I'm remembering correctly, or maybe was it 8 or 9, one of those two, to where they did an orbital demonstration of the Apollo modules to a LEM to command module docking process, and then maneuvering around with the LEM and then simulating a docking with the command module. The reason I don't think that's a good idea is because at most that scenario is going to happen once. Orion will be primarily docking with the Lunar Gateway, not with Starship. And so a Starship to Orion docking in low Earth orbit, to me, is a waste of an SLS launch. That's $4 billion we're spending to not go to the moon. I'm not a fan of that at all. I really think that if there's any sort of docking test that should be done, it should be Orion to Lunar Gateway out in cislunar space. Back in the days of Apollo, we had the luxury to do those sorts of tests. We don't have that kind of luxury this time with Artemis, because the time that elapsed between that orbital test of Apollo, the LEM and the command module in orbit, and Apollo 11 was a mere 4 months. Only 4 months went by between that test and a human landing on the moon. And the reason for that is we had Saturn V after Saturn V rocket launching in those days. We had the funding necessary to support Saturn V after Saturn V. We don't have the funding to support SLS after SLS. So I really think that that kind of mission configuration is a waste. I really think instead we need to get the most bang for our buck every time we launch SLS, until we stop using SLS completely. But that's not likely to happen until after Artemis 8 or so. NASA is contracted with Boeing and with Lockheed Martin for SLS and Orion through Artemis 8. We are sadly stuck with SLS at least through Artemis 8. After that, maybe all bets are off. But sadly, we pretty much got, SLS until that time. But on the other side of the equation, I think it is highly, highly unlikely that NASA is going to permit Starship to handle every bit of a moon landing mission for some time. I think that it's going to be a while before Starship is fully proven enough to where NASA is going to be comfortable enough to let it handle the whole thing. Look at how obsessive NASA is being right now about Orion's heat shield. Did the heat shield work? Yes, it did. Did it protect the ship, and did it make it to where nobody would have been harmed inside Orion if there had been astronauts on board on Artemis 1? Yeah, they would have been safe. However, NASA is unwilling to launch Artemis 2 until they fully understand why the heat shield did not perform as they expected it to perform. Starship, rather, the space shuttle and what happened with Columbia and Challenger has left NASA really gun shy. Frankly, next to terrified. They are really frightened to lose any more astronauts, especially on a moon mission. And that being the case, I think it's highly unlikely that they're going to be prepared to allow Starship to handle the vast majority of the job until Starship is far more thoroughly tested. So, should Lunar Gateway be built in Leo and then moved to lunar orbit? Michael, the only way I think that they should do that is if the power and propulsion element on Lunar Gateway has enough fuel and enough power to take Lunar Gateway all the way. I don't think we should make it any more complicated than that. But yeah, that might be one potential solution. The power and propulsion element is going to have, or does have, one of the most powerful ion engines ever designed. So yeah, it is possible that they'll make use of that. So anyway, yeah, no mission to abort escape pods. That's a good point. That was just made here. Um, the Starship's ability to abort is pretty minimal. There, as a matter of fact, kind of taking a chance with Starship in terms that it doesn't have the ability to abort during a lunar descent. During a landing on the lunar surface, Starship can't even abort under those circumstances, which, by the way, is something that Apollo could do. So that alone is a bit frightening. And I really think that the lack of proper abort facilities on Starship is also going to make NASA really gun shy. Now, once again, do I think that Starship will be able to carry out private missions that to where they're not being held back by NASA's fear of disaster? Yeah, I think that that's very possible. And I encourage, and I'm sure, Elon doesn't need my encouragement. I'm pretty sure that he has it in mind to carry out some private missions of his own without NASA's approval. And I think Jeff Bezos has those ideas in mind too. But still, if this is going to be a NASA mission, I think SLS is going to be engaged in that process through Artemis 8 minimum. And perhaps even longer. We'll see how that goes. Am I happy about that? No. Hell no. Not happy about that in the least. But getting back again to what NASA's plans for Starship appear to be, I think it's becoming really, really clear that what they're saying is going to happen with Artemis is just a small piece of what they really want to do. And they see the long term potential of Starship and even Blue Moon for that matter. And they see the potential of building a big lunar base. Not only that, they also want to kickstart lunar industries such as lunar mining, that sort of thing. Oh, how can they abort descent to the moon is a question. Here's how Apollo does it and how a lot of proposed lunar landers do it. They're multi-stage landers. Okay, you have a primary propulsion system on the bottom, and then you have a capsule on the top, and the capsule ejects and heads back to lunar orbit after the mission is completed with the astronauts on board. That's how the Apollo mission did it. And that capsule usually has a solid rocket motor on board because solid rocket boosters are capable of providing instant thrust right off the bat. You don't have to spool them up. You don't have to wait for them to, to start building up power. They're not like liquid rocket engines. They give you that instant thrust so you can zoom away from the primary ship. So a lot of the lunar landers that were proposed in the old days had this capability, the ability to have a capsule on top, or a capsule somewhere on the ship, but certainly on top's usually best, with a solid rocket engine, and that's how you would abort. Starship doesn't have anything like that. It doesn't have solid rocket motors, for one thing. So spooling up those engines, it's a lot more complicated, especially if you're descending. You have to spool them up, and then try to get enough thrust to not only arrest your downward momentum, but then to head back up. And Starships just doesn't have the capability of doing that, unfortunately. If it's already on its way down, it still has a lot of propellant on board. And so it weighs more than just that 100 tons worth of stainless steel. And so if you got propellant on board, oxidizer on board, payload on board, the stainless steel, etc., the engines are not powerful enough to spool up and arrest that downward momentum and then take a Starship all the way back up to the lunar gateway on an abort. The only way it works is if you have a smaller module, say a third stage on Starship, for example, that's capable of ejecting and heading back up, which currently Starship does not have that capability. Hopefully one day it will. Roger, thank you so much for the $20. Really, really appreciate that. Your fifth super chat on a live stream. So all of that having been said, though, once again, I think the most important takeaway that we have here is the fact that NASA really does have some big ambitions. This is about going to the moon to stay, and if you're going to go to the moon to stay, you need to go big. You don't want tiny little habitats and a tiny little two-person base or anything like that. You want to have capability. You want to have, maybe a half dozen astronauts or a dozen astronauts in the long run. You want to have a larger habitat. You want to have multiple rovers. You want to have lunar mining equipment. And all of that cannot be deployed with a rocket with substantial payload capabilities, which is exactly what NASA is asking for from SpaceX right now and Starship. It's really obvious that their intentions for the moon are much, much more ambitious than what's being spelled out in Artemis. And that all makes sense because Artemis was originally designed for SLS and a small little lunar lander, perhaps something like the Dynetics Alpaca. That was the original intent. But now that NASA is choosing to go big, the ambition and the ships necessary to make that ambition possible, all of that is being proposed right now. I think that's really exciting. On the downside, and I always have to really try to keep it real on this channel and talk about downsides as well. On the downside, something this ambitious is going to take more time. It's going to take more time to get Starship to the point to where it can do all of these things that we're asking it to do. And it's not going to be third quarter of 2026. I don't think it's going to be 2027 either. I think 2028 is the earliest that we can expect Starship to set people down on the moon. But the good news is that once we do get this process going, NASA is going to be setting up some pretty big operations on the moon. And one of the big reasons I think they want to do that is they want to have a big established permanent presence there that China can't get rid of. They acknowledge and they understand the threat that China presents to their plans. And the bigger their presence at Shackleton Crater, the tougher it's going to be for China to dislodge it. How about the Starship Enterprise? Hey, that's what all of us want to see, isn't it, Babsu? Thank you so much for your support, by the way. So, folks, all of that having been said, my battery is about to give out here, so I don't want to just get interrupted at the end of this. So, thank you very much for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe. Also, please consider supporting me on Patreon or with PayPal, because that's the way I'm going to get to another one of these Starship launches. That's the way I'm going to be able to do another transatlantic flight and bring you all the details of the next Starship launch, or the next one I can get to anyway, up close and personal. Definitely want to do that. And that's how you guys can make that happen. So please keep that in mind. But once again, really appreciate you tuning in tonight. And until Starship carries out all of the tasks, all of the missions that NASA has in mind for it, making a permanent and large scale presence on the moon a reality, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.